My name is Rosie Holly, and I never thought I'd live to see the day my own son would choose his wife's dog over me. But that's exactly what happened. And because of it, I ended up leaving a letter that changed everything in our family. It was a Thursday night in early October. I remember the fluorescent lights above my hospital bed, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the sound of the monitor keeping time with my breath. My breathing was shallow and uneven. I had been admitted after a sudden flare-up of my lung condition. The doctor said it was serious, very serious. They called my family and told them they should come right away. I lay there, expecting to see Patrick walk through the door at any moment. He's my only child. Even when he was busy, I always believed that if I really needed him, he'd be there. I thought that's just what family does. The nurse came in quietly, checking the tubes and the oxygen flow. She glanced at me, then hesitated before she spoke. "Mrs. Holly," she said gently, "we spoke to your son. He and his wife can't come tonight. They have a commitment." I blinked, trying to understand. A commitment? I asked. She hesitated again. "They have a dog obedience class for their golden retriever. They said it's important because the class was already paid for." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. A dog obedience class. My oxygen mask hissed softly while I tried to make sense of it. I was lying there in a hospital bed, not knowing if I'd make it through the night, and my son had chosen a dog class over being with me. I felt something inside me shift, not anger exactly, and not just sadness. It was a kind of cold clarity. I realized this wasn't a one-time thing. This was the result of years of choices, years of small moments where I was second place. The nurse asked if I wanted her to call anyone else. I told her no. I didn't want pity visitors. What I wanted was the truth about how my life had ended up here, and why I'd let it get this far. Lying there, I thought back to the first time I met Emily. She was polite, with a bright smile, and she had that dog with her even then. I didn't think much of it at the time. People love their pets, but I didn't realize just how much her world revolved around that animal. And I didn't see how, slowly, my son's world would start revolving around it too. That night in the hospital, the hours dragged on. The nurses were kind. One even sat with me for a while, talking softly, so I wouldn't feel alone. I appreciated it more than I can say, but the truth is, there's nothing quite like the absence of your own child when you need them the most. Somewhere around midnight, I knew I had a decision to make. I couldn't keep pretending this was normal. I couldn't keep letting myself be hurt over and over again by the same people. If Patrick and Emily had shown me who they were, it was time I believed them. So I reached over to the little rolling table by my bed and pulled out the small notepad I keep in my purse. My hands shook, partly from weakness, partly from something else. The realization that this might be the last letter I ever wrote to my son. I didn't write with spite. I didn't write to shame him. I wrote because I needed to say the words out loud, even if they were only on paper. I told him how much I loved him, how I'd always hoped we'd be close, and how deeply it hurt to realize I couldn't count on him when it mattered. I told him I was choosing to step back, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed peace in the time I had left. When I finished, I folded the paper neatly, wrote his name on the outside, and placed it with my discharge papers. I didn't know if he would read it right away or if it would sit unopened in a drawer somewhere. But I knew I had done my part. I had said what needed saying. As I set the letter down, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet strength. For years, I'd been afraid to speak up, afraid to make waves. That night, in that hospital bed, I realized I was done being afraid. You might be wondering how it got to that point, how a relationship between a mother and son could break down over something like a dog. Well, it didn't happen overnight. It happened little by little over years of small choices and ignored warnings. And that's the story I'm going to tell you. Because if it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. And maybe, just maybe, hearing my story will help someone else see the truth before it's too late. Patrick married Emily 5 years ago. At the time, I thought she was nice enough. She worked at a local insurance agency, always had her nails done, and she talked a lot about her hobbies, mostly that dog of hers, Cooper. He was a big golden retriever, still young then, with more energy than sense. I figured, well, people love their pets, and it wasn't my place to have an opinion. The wedding was small. I remember standing with Patrick before the ceremony, straightening his tie. He looked nervous, but happy. I told myself it didn't matter if Emily and I weren't going to be best friends. As long as my son was happy, I could be happy for him. The first year of their marriage, I noticed little things. Emily liked to be the one to host holidays, which was fine at first. But by the second year, it was clear she wanted to be in control of how everything was done. Thanksgiving used to be at my house with my recipes: roast, turkey, cornbread stuffing, cranberry salad the way my mother made it. Suddenly, it was their Thanksgiving, and the menu was her choice. She didn't ask me to bring my stuffing. She said she'd already planned everything and wanted to try new traditions. I told myself to let it go. Traditions can change. People can make new memories. But then the visits to my house became fewer. When they did come over, Cooper came too. Every time. I didn't think much of it at first, until the spring Patrick and Emily brought him over, and I noticed my throat getting scratchy and my eyes starting to itch. I chalked it up to pollen. It was allergy season, after all. But the same thing happened in the fall, and again that winter. Each time Cooper visited, I'd start coughing later that night. I mentioned it to Patrick, and he brushed it off. "It's probably just dust, Mom. Or maybe you're catching colds easier now." Then came the day it got more noticeable. Cooper had been rolling around on my couch, leaving behind enough hair to knit a blanket. That evening, I started wheezing. It wasn't terrible, but it was enough for me to take it seriously. At my next checkup, I mentioned it to my doctor, and he told me pet dander could be triggering it. He didn't tell me to avoid Cooper completely yet, just to be mindful. I brought it up to Emily, thinking she'd understand. Maybe Cooper could stay home next time? I said gently, "The last couple of visits, I've been having some trouble breathing afterward." She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "Oh, Rosie, Cooper's part of the family. He goes everywhere with us. Maybe you could take an allergy pill before we come." It was said lightly, but it was clear she wasn't going to leave him at home. From then on, it became a quiet battle I didn't know I was fighting. Every plan involved Cooper. If they invited me to dinner, it was at their house, because Cooper doesn't like being alone. If they did come to mine, they made sure he had his spot on my living room rug, right in the middle of everything. I tried to adapt. I vacuumed before and after visits, kept windows open for fresh air, washed throws and cushions more often. But each time, the coughing got just a little worse. The holidays didn't feel like they used to. Christmas morning used to mean Patrick and I sitting in our pajamas, having cinnamon rolls and coffee before the gift exchange. With Emily, Christmas morning was a bigger production. Her family, their friends, and always Cooper front and center, wearing a red bow and taking up more attention than anyone else in the room. I could feel my place shrinking. Conversations seemed to go around me. If I talked about something from Patrick's childhood, Emily would change the subject. If I mentioned I wasn't feeling well, Emily would smile and say, "Well, Cooper had a rough night too." It was said like a joke, but it landed hard. Looking back, I can see these were the early warning signs. At the time, I didn't want to believe they mattered. I told myself that love for a pet didn't have to take away from love for a person. I believed that if something serious happened, family would always step up. But each time Emily dismissed my concerns about Cooper, each time Patrick stayed quiet instead of speaking up, it chipped away at that belief. I wasn't asking them to get rid of the dog. I wasn't even asking for much, just the occasional visit without him, so we could spend time together without me worrying about my health. That small request became the thing they avoided, as if leaving Cooper at home for a couple of hours was too much to ask. By the time my health really started to change, the pattern was already set. I just didn't want to see it yet. And that pattern, those little choices they kept making, would lead straight to that night in the hospital where the truth finally hit me. But before we get to that, I need to tell you how my health started slipping faster than I expected, and how that changed everything. When I retired, I thought I'd finally have time to do the things I'd put off for years. I have a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of Peoria, Illinois. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. The backyard is just big enough for a vegetable patch and a row of peonies that bloom every spring. I keep the place tidy, and I've always been proud that I can still handle most things myself. Every Tuesday morning, I go to my church group. We meet in the basement of the Methodist Church downtown, share coffee, and plan whatever community work is coming up. Once a month, I volunteer at the food pantry. It's not heavy lifting. I greet people, help with forms, and make sure everyone feels welcome. Those days give me a sense of purpose. Even with my calendar filled here and there, the house is quiet most of the time. My husband passed away 12 years ago. We had a good life together, and losing him left a space nothing has ever really filled. Patrick is my only child, and in the years after his father died, he was good about checking in. We'd talk on the phone every couple of days, and he'd stop by on Sundays. But since he married Emily, the visits have grown fewer. And when they do happen, they're rarely just him. Cooper comes too. Always. At first, I told myself it was no big deal. But Cooper isn't exactly a sit quietly in the corner kind of dog. He's big and full of energy, which would be fine if Patrick and Emily kept him in check. They don't. He jumps on my couch, plants himself at the table when we eat, and sheds enough to cover the floor in a thin gold layer. One Sunday, they came over after a walk in the park. It had rained the night before. Cooper bounded into my living room and straight onto my quilt-covered recliner, leaving muddy paw prints across fabric I'd stitched by hand years ago. I asked Emily if she could wipe his paws before he came in next time. She laughed and said, "Oh, Rosie, he's just a dog. He doesn't know better." The worst was the day I caught him with his paws on my dining table, sniffing at the plates. Patrick chuckled, scratched behind Cooper's ears, and said he just wants to be part of the family meal. I didn't think it was funny. My table is where I serve food to guests, and I was raised to believe animals didn't belong there. But I bit my tongue because I didn't want to cause a scene. I've learned that small things add up. When you let them go over and over, they start to weigh heavier than you expect. The muddy paws, the fur in my food, the coughing fits that followed every visit, they all chipped away at my comfort in my own home. There were times I considered saying no when Patrick asked to come by, just to avoid the stress. But I didn't want to push my son away. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe he'd eventually notice on his own and change things. It never happened. Instead, the pattern got stronger. If I suggested we meet somewhere other than my house, Emily would say it wasn't fair to leave Cooper at home. If I asked about just Patrick coming over, she'd say they already had plans as a family. And by family, she meant the 3 of them, including the dog. I can't remember the last time Patrick and I had a meal together, just the 2 of us. Every memory in recent years has Cooper in it, front and center. The dog's birthday got more attention than mine. Emily baked him a cake shaped like a bone and posted pictures online. My birthday dinner that year was takeout pizza eaten in their living room, with Cooper nudging my arm for a bite the whole time. It's not that I dislike animals. I grew up with dogs. But when you're dealing with health problems, things change. The air in my house feels heavier after Cooper's been inside. My breathing gets tight. It's not an opinion. It's something my doctor has confirmed. But that never seemed to carry weight with Patrick and Emily. I've spent my whole life trying not to be a burden. I don't call for help unless I really need it. I've always believed in handling my own problems. That independence is important to me. But it's lonely too. When you live alone, you notice the empty spaces more. You hope your family will want to fill them, at least once in a while. That hope kept me saying yes to visits, even when they left me coughing for days afterward. I told myself, it's just a couple of hours. You can manage. But each time, I felt a little more like a guest in my own home. Looking back now, I can see how clear the signs were. The dog wasn't just a pet in their household. He was the center of it. Everything else, even family, came second. I just didn't want to admit that I might be in that everything else category. The truth is, I held on to the picture of who I thought Patrick was, instead of seeing who he'd become. And by the time my health took a turn for the worse, I was still clinging to that old picture, hoping it would come back into focus. That hope would cost me more than I ever expected, because when my condition finally got serious, I would find out without any doubt exactly where I stood in their priorities. It was during my annual checkup that things took a turn. My breathing had been getting worse for months, but I told myself it was just age or maybe the winter air. When I mentioned the coughing and tightness in my chest to my doctor, he decided to run a few extra tests. A week later, I sat in his office while he explained the results. "Rosie, you have COPD," he said gently. "It's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It means your lungs aren't working as well as they used to, and it can get worse over time." I'd heard of it before, but didn't know much about it. He explained it could cause shortness of breath, wheezing, and frequent lung infections. He also made it clear there were things I could do to help slow it down: avoid irritants, use inhalers as prescribed, and keep up with light activity. Then he added something I already suspected but didn't want to hear. One of the biggest triggers for people in your situation is pet dander. If you're around dogs or cats, especially in enclosed spaces, it can make your symptoms worse and even cause dangerous flare-ups. I nodded, already thinking about Cooper. That afternoon, I went home and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying to decide how to bring it up to Patrick and Emily. I didn't want to make it sound like I was attacking their life or their choices, but I had to protect my health. The next time Patrick called to say they'd be visiting, I cleared my throat and said, "Honey, I need to ask you something important. My doctor says I shouldn't be around animals because of my breathing. Could you leave Cooper at home when you come over?" There was a pause. Then Patrick said, "I'll talk to Emily." When they arrived that Sunday, Cooper was trotting right behind them. I looked at Patrick, and he avoided my eyes. Emily was the one who spoke. "Rosie, Cooper's part of the family. We can't just leave him alone all day. If you're worried, maybe you could wear a mask or something. That way, everyone's comfortable." I forced a small smile, but inside I felt that cold sting of being dismissed. It wasn't about a mask. It was about the fact that I had made a simple request for my health, and it was brushed aside like it didn't matter. Over the next few months, my symptoms became more unpredictable. Some days I could go about my routine without too much trouble. Other days, I'd be short of breath just walking from the kitchen to the living room. I learned to keep my rescue inhaler in my pocket at all times. Every time they visited, I'd spend hours cleaning afterward, vacuuming the floors, washing cushion covers, and wiping down every surface Cooper had touched. Even so, my chest would feel tight for days. My doctor noticed the pattern right away when I told him about it. He was firm this time. Rosie, if you keep exposing yourself to that trigger, you're putting yourself in real danger. So I tried again. This time I spoke to Patrick privately. I'm not asking you to give up Cooper. I said, I just need you to visit without him. I can't keep getting sick like this. Patrick shifted uncomfortably. Emily feels strongly that Cooper should be included in everything. She says he's our child. You know how she is about him. I bit my tongue before I said something I'd regret. I knew exactly how she was about him. I just didn't realize until then how far that loyalty extended. The holidays that year were the hardest. I skipped their Christmas dinner because I knew Cooper would be in the middle of everything, and I didn't want to spend New Year's in the hospital. I told them I wasn't feeling up to it. Patrick sent me a picture of Cooper wearing reindeer antlers with the message, "We missed you." No photo of Patrick. No call to check how I was doing. By spring, I was using my inhalers more often, and I'd had 2 flare-ups bad enough to land me in urgent care. The second time, the nurse quietly asked if I lived with someone who smoked or had pets. When I explained the situation, she gave me a sympathetic look. You have to set boundaries. Rosie, your lungs can't afford otherwise. It's easy for someone to tell you to set boundaries. It's much harder to actually do it when it's your own child on the other side. I'd spent my whole life putting Patrick first, and I kept hoping that if I explained my needs clearly enough, he'd put me first too, just once. But each time I asked, the answer was the same. Cooper is family. Cooper comes with us. Cooper doesn't get left behind. And with every visit, I felt my health and my importance slipping further down their list. By the time summer rolled around, I was starting to understand something I didn't want to face. This wasn't just about a dog. This was about where I ranked in my son's life. And the truth was, I wasn't anywhere near the top. I still didn't know then just how far it would go. But the day was coming when that ranking would be made crystal clear, and it would happen in a way I could never have imagined. If you've ever had your health dismissed by your own family, click subscribe. And if you wouldn't stand for this kind of treatment, share this story. Let's see how many of us know exactly how this feels. It was late August when Patrick called to invite me over for Sunday dinner. I hadn't been to their house in months, and a part of me hesitated right away. But he sounded so upbeat on the phone, talking about how Emily was making her famous roast chicken and how they wanted to catch up. I told myself it was only a couple of hours, and I could handle it if I was careful. I packed my inhaler in my purse before I left, just in case. I even brought along a light scarf to cover my nose and mouth if the air felt heavy. When I pulled up to their house, Cooper was sitting in the front yard, tail wagging. The moment Emily opened the door, he bounded inside ahead of her. I stepped in and could already smell that familiar mix of dog hair and whatever air freshener Emily used to try to cover it. Patrick gave me a quick hug, and Cooper jumped up against my legs. I patted him lightly but took a step back, trying not to stir up more hair than necessary. Emily was bustling in the kitchen, calling out that dinner would be ready soon. I sat down in the living room, but Cooper followed me and hopped onto the couch right next to where I was sitting. I shifted over, brushing a few stray hairs off my sleeve. The air felt thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my scarf up slightly and focused on small talk with Patrick. When Emily called us to the table, Cooper trotted in too and plopped himself down at Patrick's feet. We started eating, and for a while, things felt almost normal. But halfway through the meal, I noticed my chest tightening. It was the same creeping feeling I'd had before, like the air wasn't going in as deeply as it should. I set my fork down and took a slow breath. I think I need to step outside for some fresh air. I said quietly. Emily glanced up, but didn't look concerned. You're fine, Rosie. It's probably just a little dry in here. Drink some water." I didn't want to argue, so I sipped from my glass and tried to continue eating. But within a few minutes, my breathing was worse. I could feel the wheezing now, and I knew I needed to use my inhaler. I excused myself, got up, and went toward the living room. Patrick followed me, finally noticing the strain in my voice. "Mom, are you okay?" I shook my head, trying to get a full breath. "I need my inhaler now." He grabbed my purse, and I took 2 quick puffs. Usually, that would help right away. This time, it didn't. My chest felt like it was closing in, and the wheezing grew louder. I could see Patrick's face shift from casual concern to real worry. "Emily," he called, "I think we need to take Mom to urgent care." Emily came in, still holding the serving spoon. "Patrick, it's probably just the heat. Let her rest for a minute." I leaned against the wall, clutching my chest. "No, this isn't heat," I managed to say. Patrick didn't wait any longer. "Call 911, he said sharply. Emily looked annoyed but grabbed her phone. The next few minutes were a blur. The operator's voice on speaker, Patrick opening the front door for the paramedics, Cooper barking in the background. When the paramedics arrived, they moved quickly, checking my oxygen levels. One of them looked at Patrick and said, "She's not getting enough air. We need to get her on oxygen and transport her now." They placed the mask over my face, and I felt the cool rush of oxygen. Even then, my body was still fighting for each breath. They lifted me onto the stretcher and wheeled me out to the ambulance. I caught a glimpse of Cooper sitting at the window, watching. The ride to the hospital felt longer than it probably was. I focused on the oxygen and the calm voice of the paramedic sitting beside me. He told me we were almost there, that they were going to take good care of me. When we arrived, the ER staff took over. They ran tests, gave me medication to open my airways, and monitored my oxygen closely. The doctor confirmed it had been a severe COPD flare-up, the kind that could have turned life-threatening if I hadn't gotten help quickly. As I lay there, catching my breath under the oxygen mask, I thought about how close I'd come to a different outcome. And I thought about how it all started with a simple dinner invitation, one I'd accepted because I wanted to believe my son and his wife would put my well-being ahead of their routines for just one night. That night became the turning point. I didn't know then what would happen the next time my breathing failed, but I knew the stage had been set. Patrick had seen with his own eyes how serious it could get. The question was whether it would make any difference the next time. The truth? It wouldn't. And that next time would show me, in the clearest, coldest way, exactly where I stood. If you're watching this thinking, "I can't believe her own family let it get this far," then prove it, hit subscribe. And if you wouldn't have left me sitting there struggling to breathe, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. After that dinner, the doctors kept me in the hospital overnight. The breathing treatments helped, but the tightness in my chest lingered. They wanted to run more tests to make sure I hadn't developed an infection on top of the COPD flare-up. By morning, I felt a little better, but nowhere near strong enough to go home. They moved me from the ER into a regular hospital room. I figured it would just be for a day or two, but late that afternoon, my breathing dipped again, fast. A nurse came rushing in, checked my oxygen levels, and called for the doctor. He told me my saturation had dropped too low and that they were transferring me to the ICU for closer monitoring. He spoke gently, but his face was serious. "We need to keep a close eye on you tonight, Mrs. Holly. These flare-ups can turn quickly. I'm going to have my staff call your family so they can be here with you." I didn't protest. In fact, part of me was relieved. Patrick had seen me struggle at dinner. Surely he would understand now. Surely he would come. A little while later, a nurse came in with her cell phone in hand. "I spoke with your son," she said slowly, and explained the situation. "He said he'll call you in a bit." She left, and I waited. The phone on my side table stayed silent. It was close to 8 p.m. when I overheard a snippet of conversation just outside my door. The voices were low, but the walls in that part of the ICU aren't thick. I recognized Patrick's voice. He was talking to one of the nurses. "Look, it's already late," he was saying. "We'd have to get Cooper in the car, and he doesn't like being alone. All the boarding places are closed tonight. We'll come first thing in the morning." The nurse must have tried to explain again because Patrick added, "I understand it's serious, but she's in good hands there. We'll see her tomorrow." I closed my eyes. My hands were resting on the blanket, and I noticed they weren't trembling the way they had earlier. That wasn't because I was calm. It was because something inside me had gone quiet, the part that used to rush to make excuses for him, to believe there was a good reason for everything. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just lay there listening to the sounds of the ICU, the steady beep of monitors, the shuffle of shoes in the hallway, the hiss of oxygen, and realized my son wasn't coming. The night nurse came in later to check my vitals. She must have noticed the look on my face, because she paused. "Do you want me to try calling him again?" "No," I said softly. "That's not necessary." She gave me a kind look, but didn't press. She adjusted my mask and told me to rest. Rest didn't come. My mind wandered through years of memories, birthday parties when Patrick was little, high school graduations, dinners where we laughed until we couldn't catch our breath. Somewhere along the way, that connection had thinned, and now it was gone entirely. I thought about how I'd been raised to believe that family shows up, no matter what. And here I was in the ICU with my son just a few miles away, choosing to stay home because of a dog. I don't blame Cooper. He's just an animal doing what animals do. But I couldn't wrap my head around how Patrick and Emily could let that be the reason they weren't here. At some point after midnight, the nurse offered to help me make a call. I shook my head. "There's no one else to call," I told her. And that was the truth. Most of my close friends were already in bed, and the few relatives I had left were scattered in other states. I lay awake most of the night, the oxygen mask pressing lightly against my face. Every now and then, I'd hear a code called over the intercom and think about how easily it could be my name next. And still, there would be no footsteps rushing down the hall for me. When the sun finally came up, I felt the kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. The doctor came by and said I was stable enough to move back to a regular room. He explained the plan for the next few days: more breathing treatments, antibiotics, and a slow reintroduction of movement, so I could regain my strength. Just before they wheeled me out of the ICU, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Patrick. "We'll come by around noon. Emily has to walk Cooper first." No apology, no mention of the night before, just a schedule that revolved around the same routine that had kept them away in the first place. That was the moment I knew the relationship would never be the same. Something had shifted in me. I'd been pushed past the point of trying to explain, past the point of hoping things would change if I just asked one more time. The visit they made that afternoon was polite but distant. Patrick asked how I was feeling. Emily brought a bag of grapes and a crossword book, and they stayed less than half an hour. Cooper was waiting in the car. After they left, I stared at the small table beside my bed. On it sat my phone, my reading glasses, and a plain notepad I'd brought from home. I didn't touch it yet, but I knew before the day was over, I'd start writing the words I'd been holding back for far too long. Those words would become the letter that ended it all. That evening, after Patrick and Emily's short visit, the room felt even quieter than usual. The television was on, but I couldn't tell you what was playing. I just kept looking at the notepad on the table, the same way you might look at a door you know you need to open, but you're not ready to step through yet. I knew the words had been building for a long time. Every moment I'd swallowed my feelings Every time I'd let my needs slide to keep the peace, it had all been piling up inside me. After last night in the ICU, there was no more room left. I reached for the notepad and my pen. My hands didn't shake this time. My breathing was steady, thanks to the oxygen, and my mind was clear. I wrote Patrick's name at the top, then sat for a moment, letting the first sentence come to me. It wasn't angry. It wasn't spiteful. Patrick, I want you to know that I love you. I started there because it was true, and no matter what had happened, it needed to be said first. I went on to tell him I was proud of the man he had once been, the son who used to call me after work just to say hello, who used to show up at my door without needing a reason. Then I told him what I had come to understand, that in the last few years I had been trying to hold on to someone who no longer existed in the same way. I explained that I didn't expect perfection, but I did expect to matter enough that my health, my life, would be more important than a dog's schedule. I reminded him of the dinners, the holidays, the visits where Cooper took center stage, while I sat coughing in my own living room. I told him how I had asked more than once for small changes to keep me safe, and how those requests had been pushed aside. And then I got to the hardest part. Patrick, I cannot keep begging for basic care for my own child. I cannot keep putting myself in situations that hurt me just to keep a place in your life. This isn't punishment. This is me choosing to live whatever days I have left in peace. I explained that I would not be attending gatherings where Cooper was present indoors. I would not agree to visits that ignored my medical needs. I told him he was welcome to come see me on his own anytime, but I would no longer pretend that being treated as second place was acceptable. The pen moved easily over the page. The words were honest, but they weren't cruel. I didn't try to change his mind. I didn't argue my case like I had so many times before. I simply laid out the truth and the boundary that came with it. I ended the letter the way I began it. I will always love you, but love without respect and care is not enough. My door is open to you, and only you when you're ready to walk through it. I folded the pages neatly, slid them into an envelope, and wrote his name across the front in careful letters. Holding it in my hands, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because I knew this might be the last real conversation we would ever have, even if it was on paper. Relief because for the first time in years, I was standing up for myself without waiting for someone else to approve. The next morning, the doctor told me I could be discharged later in the day. My breathing was stable, and they'd given me new medications to take home. As the nurse went over the paperwork, I slipped the envelope in with my discharge forms, making sure it would be handed directly to Patrick when he came to pick me up. When he arrived, he was alone. I didn't ask about Emily or Cooper. He helped gather my things, signed the necessary forms, and glanced at the envelope without saying much. He slid it into his jacket pocket. The drive home was mostly quiet. He asked a few polite questions about my medications and whether I needed groceries. I answered, but I didn't bring up the letter. That was his to read in his own time. When we pulled into my driveway, he carried my bag to the door, gave me a quick hug, and said he'd check in later. I watched him walk back to the car, get in, and drive away. I didn't know when or if he'd read the letter. I didn't know what he would feel when he did, but I knew I had done what I needed to do. I had put my needs in writing, in a way that couldn't be interrupted or brushed aside. That night, sitting in my own living room with the windows open and the air clear, I realized how much lighter I felt. The boundary was set. The choice was now his. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had chosen myself. If you've ever had to choose yourself because someone you love kept hurting you, hit that like button and subscribe. And if you'd never make your loved ones reach this point, share this with someone who needs to understand what real boundaries look like. When Patrick drove away that afternoon, I stood in the doorway, for a long moment before closing it. The house was quiet, and for once, the quiet didn't feel heavy. I set my bag down, took off my shoes, and sat in my recliner by the window. The air was clean. I could take a full breath without feeling my chest tighten. That alone felt like a gift. The next day, a friend from my church group stopped by with a casserole and fresh rolls. She didn't ask for details. She just gave me a warm hug and told me they'd missed me at Tuesday's meeting. That kind of care, the kind that doesn't need explaining, meant more to me than I could say. Within the week, I signed up for pulmonary rehab at the local hospital. Twice a week, I worked with a small group of others who were also learning to manage their breathing. We did light exercises, practiced using our inhalers properly, and learned ways to keep our lungs healthy. It felt good to be doing something for myself. I also joined a senior walking group that met at the mall early in the mornings before the stores opened. It wasn't about speed or distance. It was about moving, talking, and not sitting alone all day. The first morning, I was nervous about keeping up, but the others welcomed me right away. By the second week, I looked forward to those walks almost as much as my coffee afterward. At home, I made a few changes to keep my space even healthier. I bought an air purifier for the living room, got rid of rugs that collected dust, and kept the windows open whenever the weather allowed. My nights started to improve. I wasn't waking up coughing, and I found myself sleeping through until morning. I also made one decision I knew I needed. I blocked Patrick's number for a while. It wasn't out of anger. It was because I knew if he called and asked for something, I'd be tempted to slip back into old habits. I needed time to focus on healing without being pulled into the same cycle again. About 2 weeks after I got home, Emily sent a short text from her number. It read, "Hope you're feeling better. Cooper misses you." I read it twice, then set the phone down without replying. There was nothing I could say that would change what had already been made clear. My health wasn't their priority, and I wasn't going to keep pretending otherwise. The days began to find their own rhythm. Church on Tuesdays, rehab on Wednesdays and Fridays, walking group 3 mornings a week. On Saturdays, I treated myself to coffee and a muffin at the small cafe near the post office, where the waitress always remembered my order. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with 2 friends from church. We just finished coffee, and they were telling me about an upcoming charity bake sale. We laughed about our different baking disasters over the years, and I realized my laugh sounded different, lighter, easier. I noticed the change in other small ways, too. I had more energy to work in my garden. I could stand at the stove long enough to cook a proper meal without feeling winded. Even my appetite came back. It wasn't just my lungs that felt clearer, my mind did too. Every now and then, I'd wonder if Patrick had read the letter. I imagined him sitting at the kitchen table, maybe late at night, reading my words. I didn't picture anger or tears, just a quiet understanding of why I'd done what I did. But whether that moment ever came, for him, wasn't something I could control anymore. A few months passed, and the seasons began to change. The peonies in my backyard started to sprout again. Standing there one morning, coffee cup in hand, I thought about how different things felt compared to just a short while ago. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I wasn't holding my breath for an apology that might never come. I was living my life, one day at a time, surrounded by people who showed up without needing to be asked twice. I wasn't alone in the way I'd feared I might be. The people who cared made themselves known. Neighbors who shoveled my walk after a snowfall, church friends who brought me soup when I had a cold, the walking group ladies who saved me a seat at breakfast. And maybe that's the thing I'd been missing all along, realizing that family isn't just the people you're related to. It's the people who see you, value you, and make space for you in their lives without conditions. By the time summer rolled around again, I'd learned something important. setting that boundary with Patrick wasn't just about keeping Cooper out of my house. It was about making sure my own needs weren't always at the bottom of the list. For the first time in years, I was breathing easier in every sense of the word. It's been a year since that letter left my hands and landed in Patrick's. I still don't know if he read it the day I gave it to him or if it sat in a drawer for weeks. What I do know is that my life since then has been quieter, healthier, and in many ways freer. People often think the hardest part about setting a boundary is saying the words. But for me, the hardest part was what came after, living with the silence that followed. For months, I didn't hear from Patrick beyond a couple of short texts. Emily never reached out again. And as much as that used to hurt me, now I see it differently. There's a difference between being loved and being prioritized. I believe Patrick loves me in his own way. But when it came time to choose between showing up for me or keeping his and Emily's routine with Cooper, I wasn't the priority. That truth is still sharp, but it's no longer shocking. I've thought a lot about what it means to show up for someone. It's not about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about being there in the moments when it's inconvenient, when it costs you something to show up. Anyone can be there when it's easy. The people who truly care are there when it's hard. Sometimes I wonder if Patrick will ever see the situation clearly. Will there come a day when he looks back and realizes the nights in the ICU could have been his last chance to hold my hand, to tell me he cared? I don't know. That's not something I can control. And I've learned I can't live my life waiting for someone else's moment of clarity. Over this past year, I've put my energy into the people who make the effort without being asked twice. My walking group, my church friends, my neighbors, they've become my circle. They notice when I'm not myself. They check in when the weather turns cold and the roads get icy. They've shown me that family can be chosen, and that sometimes the people who aren't related to you end up being the ones you can count on most. Looking back, I think the letter was more than a boundary. It was a turning point. I'd spent years trying to hold on to a relationship that was slipping away because I was afraid of what would happen if I let go. But the truth is, letting go didn't leave me empty. It made room for something better, peace. If you're listening to this and you found yourself in a similar place, I want you to hear me clearly. Protecting your well-being isn't selfish. It's necessary. Whether it's your health, your emotional peace, or simply your self-respect, you're allowed to choose it, even if it means stepping back from people you love. So I want to ask you, have you ever had to choose peace over family? If you did, was it the hardest decision you ever made, or the most freeing? And here's another question I want you to think about. If someone can't show up for you in your hardest moments, are they truly your people? I don't ask these to stir up anger. I ask them because for me, answering them honestly changed everything. And sometimes hearing someone else's story can be the first step in facing your own. The last time I spoke to Patrick was on my birthday. He called, we chatted for a few minutes, and we kept the conversation light. I didn't bring up the letter, and neither did he. Maybe that's where we are now, polite but distant. It's not what I once dreamed for us, but it's what I can live with. Because the truth is, the letter was my last word on the matter. I've said all I need to say. The rest is up to them. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. I hope in some way it's given you a little clarity, or at least the reminder that you're not alone if you face something like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. I read them, and you'd be surprised how many people in this community find comfort in each other's words. And if you know someone who might need to hear this, send it to them. You never know who's out there struggling with the same choice. Before you go, don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. There's always more to talk about, and I'd be glad to have you here again. Take care of yourself. Truly,